Monique, hi, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute delight to have you today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm remaining humble and positive, and I'm also very excited that we get to host you today as a guest on our podcast. Given your experience across different companies and within the HR space, I was super excited to be able to have you share your thoughts. Ideas, insights, and whatever we can get into today. I know our listeners will be delighted. I suppose it would be really good for the listeners to get to know you a little bit. So if you wouldn't mind, 60-second introduction to you in case they haven't come across your profile before.
Sure, absolutely. I am Monique Jefferson. I am currently the Chief People Officer for Community Preservation Corporation, which is the largest CDFI within the housing commercial real estate space. We are a commercial mortgage lender, primarily within Fort Worth. So I've been with the organization just under 2 years. Prior to that, I was at a public media organization in the CHRO capacity. And then prior to that, I spent a number of years across different industries, professional services, law firms, insurance companies. So financial and professional services tend to be my sweet spot. And having spent the majority of my career in investment. So I love what I do. And I like to say at this point, I think I'm approaching the industry agnostic because of the different opportunities that I've had. I am from New York. I'm a New Yorker, and I'm hopefully you will probably hear that in my accent. And sometimes I talk a little bit quick, a little fast. So just let me know if I need to slow down. But I am a New Yorker. CPC is based in New York City, and I currently reside in Brooklyn with my husband, 2 daughters.
Brilliant, and I know you've got a busy time at CPC at the moment with an avalanche of investment for some really important projects.
Yes.
I suppose it would be remiss not to talk about that on the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. It is an exciting time, not only within this space in our industry around housing, but it is an exciting time to come and join CPC. We were the recipients of a multi-billion-dollar, not million, billion-dollar grant as part of the Biden administration's greenhouse gas reduction. And so what that allows us to do is not only continue our mission-driven work in the community around affordable housing, but for us internally, everyone is quite busy right now because we have to prepare and stand up basically a new business, and we're about to do quite a bit of hiring so that we can bring in, the expertise and the talent required to execute against this grant.
Super exciting, and billions, billions of investments. So that is significant. So I could talk all day about the impact that CPC do and within that kind of area. But we're here to dive into HR and the HR and people space. And I'd like to start with just understanding a bit more about why HR for you. What's kept you in the HR and people space?
So I actually, for those of you that know me out there, I started off my career as an accountant. I went to Bentley University in Massachusetts for my undergraduate, and I majored in accounting. And I came out and started off in public accounting. Back then it was called the Big Six. Now it's the Big Four. But I started off my career at Ernst & Young being an auditor within the financial services and media sectors. And after doing that for a few years, I realized honestly, what it boiled down to was that I didn't want to be a CPA, but there were aspects of the role that I really enjoyed. So I was fortunate enough very early on in my career to really understand and articulate and be true to myself around what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was passionate about, and what I needed so that I could thrive and have a very robust career. And so when assessing that, I looked at the aspects of the role that I really enjoyed, such as I was involved in a buddy program, mentioned program. I was involved in campus recruitment, et cetera. And so when I kind of laid that all out, I said, wait a minute. I think falls into this umbrella called HR. So then I was able to make a seamless transition into the field of HR because I went to a competitor of Ernst & Young at the time, which is now known as PricewaterhouseCoopers. But when I was there, it was Coopers and Lybrand, and I was Legacy Cooper. But I joined the organization, and one of the reasons at the time why they recruited me is they said, we can teach you HR, but we want you to join us because you understand the business, or you've carried the bag, so to speak. So my first junior role or entry-level role into the field was being a resource manager for the audit practice at a competitive firm. And so from there, my HR career took off, and I had a lot of different specialists as well as generalist experiences since then.
And I love this journey because in my experience, I mean, I talk to lots of CHROs, chief people officers from around the globe, and they pivot from different areas, but not common that you see someone kind of pivot out of the audit space. The trajectory is CFO there, right? And so there's a whole other debate about CFO and CPO relationships, but we won't go into that today. But it is a super interesting change for your career.
Well, what I will tell you is that, and these are the last 3 organizations that I've worked at, if you were to ask me who on the senior leadership team do I have the strongest and best relationship with, it's always the CFO. And I think a lot of that has to do about my background. Like, I wouldn't trade it for the world. There are times where people will ask me, do you regret it? Why didn't you just go into HR into accounting and stay there to begin with, or go do HR from the beginning? And I always say I wouldn't regret it. I believe that everything happens for a reason. And I believe that my accounting background and my audit experience has shaped me to become a very strategic, effective HR leader.
Yeah, agreed. I always say, because a lot of people kind of sometimes judge when you talk about different career paths. And I always think there's no bad career path. There's only a bad career path for you. Right, that's what everyone has to remember. It's quite an interesting one. So looking at your journey and looking at the different roles that you've held, what are you seeing that's emerging in the HR space that maybe didn't exist 10, even 15 years ago? Draw your memory back. I know a lot's gone on since then.
That's a loaded question, and I don't know how much time we have, but if I had to narrow it down probably to 2 or 3 things off the top of my head. First and foremost is technology. When I entered into the workforce in the 90s, in the early 90s, laptops were just coming around, and the laptops that we have today were not as light, not as small. So just technology in general. When I entered the workforce, people had the Blackberries. They were really big. And now we have this nifty device called an iPhone, and just the different generations of the phone. I remember, I was just having a conversation. I remember the precursor to that, to a phone that allows you to text and do audio calls, was two-way pager. I don't remember if people, I know I'm dating myself. I don't even remember that. But the two-way.
I have to say, I loved the pager. It was such a simple machine. And actually, we didn't scroll for Instagram all day. But anyway, that's another story.
So technology is a big one. Another one I would say is the demographics of the workforce itself. In terms of the generations that are in the workforce. We have 5 generations in the workforce now. So that really wasn't as prevalent as it is now as it was back then. And so being able to, as an HR person, being able to meet the different needs of your demographics. I would also add diversity, specifically ethnic diversity. Particularly, the numbers of Hispanics, Latinos, African Americans, Asian, particularly within certain industries, has skyrocketed and doubled. So when I entered the workforce, there wasn't as much representation, particularly in the Black community, because as a diverse woman, I always look to see, who looks like me, particularly at the senior levels of organization. And while we've made some progress, definitely more than where it was in the early 90s, we still have a bit of ways to go in improving our representation, particularly within the senior levels of the organization. So that's also very different now. And then I would say lastly, this is very simple, but lastly, back then it used to be called personnel, right? Now we're referring to the function as HR, or in some organizations it's called the people function, right? Just by some people are referred to as a chief human resources officer, and others might be referred to as a chief people officer. So that really shows the evolution of where the function and the field of HR has come.
Yeah, and we'll dive into technology in a bit, and we'll talk about AI, because what podcast can't talk about AI these days. But I suppose I'll pick up on the two other points. I think the representation point is a really really interesting one. Certainly for us as an organisation, we are a certified minority owned and operated business, so and we're very proud of that, and we've certainly seen that become much more known as a kind of certification and a focus point for orgs to try and help. If they can't do it in their organisation, can they partner with organisations to help drive representation? And I agree with you. I think New York particularly, if we're going to focus on New York particularly, there's a lot of programs that have helped to drive that, and that's been really impressive. And I think that there's still lots more to do, and I do worry that there's so much to juggle that people are somewhat maybe not putting that as high priority right now in some orgs, and I do think that that's a mistake, to be honest. I don't know if you're seeing that as well in peer groups and across the kind of CHRO, CPO networks.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. It just needs to be part of your strategy, and it's a business imperative.
Yep, agreed. And then on the personnel point, so a running theme whenever I talk to kind of HR leaders or people leaders is this kind of pendulum swing from being administrative departments to being psychologically emotional support departments and people departments, right? And it's strange because I think we just keep going on iterations of the pendulum swinging. It's kind of, whatever the economic situations are, we start to get pushed into comfort zones of administration, tick box exercises, because, it's a bit more tense of an environment, versus when we start to see positive signs in the economic standing, then we start to see this positivity. Everyone wants to talk about how everyone feels again, and let's dive into that as a HR department. I mean, any thoughts on that? That kind of, because that seems to be a common theme.
No, absolutely. And as I'm listening to you, I would add two more things to the list: how people work or where people work. So, and I know that's been accelerated in the past, in the more recent years because of our global pandemic. But back then, it was very unheard of, and a very small percentage of individuals that would not only be 100% or even just attempt to work from home, right? Now, fast forward 20 plus years later, completely different landscape. So where people work and how people work and how they get their work done has changed drastically as well. And then the other thing that I would add for this, going back to your most recent comment, is around well-being. So I would say back then, and I know this is gonna sound, it might be off-putting to some of the listeners, but no offense, but back then, employers didn't care about how you feel or, what was going on outside of work. They maybe should have, but they just didn't. They wanted you to come to work, and the employer-employee contract has changed. Back then it was, I give you a paycheck, you come to work during these hours, you do what I ask you to do, and then that's that. Whereas now that employer-employee contract has definitely changed, and the expectations have changed as well. So what employees and what the workforce expects from their employer has changed. And I can see why, if you really break it down and think about it. We spend a lot of time at work. We spend a lot of time at work. Some people meet their spouses at work. I met my spouse at work. We developed strong friendships at work. And so the expectations of what an employee needs and how they need to be supported have changed, particularly around well-being, whether it's your health, you got medical insurance and vision and dental, but now it's more around mental well-being and your mental health. How do you, like you said, how do you feel? Because people see the connection to the workplace and your culture. People will perform well and be more productive and engage and have a sense of belonging and be committed to the company and the mission, right? If they feel like they can bring your authentic selves to work, if they're in a culture where they feel included and where they feel that they can thrive, right? So I think in companies and employers now are starting to connect the dots, and they're starting to realize that the connection around well-being, work, and culture.
I mean, that's super interesting, right, Monique? Because we hear a lot about the challenges and the trying to keep up with the pace of technology and how hard it is for a CTO and how critical it is for the business to have a really good CTO or even a CIO or a CISO now that security and other things are coming out. But we probably don't see as much on the CHROs or the chief people officers because actually they've had to keep up with the pace of people, the change of people. And, you know, as you've already highlighted a few times, massively accelerated by the pandemic, but also I think people forget that there's a lot more knowledge about well-being, mental health, the challenges of work, even down to being parents and trying to juggle children and full-time jobs. And there's just so much more information, and a CHRO and a chief people officer has to juggle and keep up with the pace of all these changes and make sure that that's brought back into the organization. We don't talk enough about that, do we?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And I agree with you. I think one of the gifts, if you will, that came out of the pandemic is the elevation and just highlighting how critical and the importance of the CHRO or the chief people officer role has become as a result of that. But you're right. I mean, it's extremely challenging because just the HR function, we constantly have to keep our finger on the pulse of what employees' needs are. How is our workforce evolving and changing? Are we creating, what type of culture do we have? Are we creating a culture where people thrive, right? Where people feel included, where they feel this connection, where they have a sense of belonging? Are they being supported overall from a well-being standpoint, whether it's physical, mental, financial, and what are your offerings in terms of your benefits and your programs that you're offering to people? Are they being fully supported, right? And so making sure that you are putting a people strategy or HR strategy in place that not only aligns to the business, but that also, checks the box and meets all those different things around your work.
And so, let's just quickly ask something on the technology space, and then we'll move into sort of talent models and skills and structures. But as I mentioned, it would be remiss of us not to mention AI. What's your view on AI from a HR perspective? Do you think it's hype? Are there real opportunities? I mean, what do you think?
So short and simple, it's here to stay. And so many organizations, myself included, we're still a little late to the party, if you will. We're still a little slow. And I think it's not because we don't want to embrace it and don't want to, implement it and have it be part of our business. But I think because there's a fear or because people are still trying to wrap their heads around it and understand it. And so I think because of that element, that's why there are some organizations that are a little bit behind it. But at the end of the day, it's here to stay. There's this perception or this feeling by employees that, oh my gosh, the machines are going to take over. This AI is going to replace humans. I'm not going to have a job. And that's just not true. What it will do is it will create an opportunity because it allows us to build capacity. It creates an opportunity to continue to automate, and a lot of the administrative, manual nature of positions that we don't like. If we leverage and use AI and just technology properly, it presents an opportunity to build capacity. It allows us to reskill or retool our workforce so that they can do more strategic media work, which is at the end of the day, that's really where you want people spending their time. And that's the type of work that you want people to do. So I think it's an opportunity. I actually think it's a good thing. I just think to take the time to really understand it and then put a plan in place to figure out how you can leverage it and how it works best in your company. Because, what other companies are doing, particularly tech companies, we're not a tech company. We're not sexy like Google or like any of these other tech companies. That's not us, right? So we've got to figure out, just because they did it or works well for them here doesn't necessarily mean that that same thing is going to work for us. However, you need to see, where's the opportunities? How can we implement this? How can we leverage this? And I think it's something that HR, as well as your technology leader, you need to do, and be partnered and do it hands in hand. And so I think a lot of organizations, myself, my organization included, we're still at that phase of, okay, people are using it, whether we want them to or not. We understand that there are concerns and challenges with respect to data. And so let's talk about what are the guidelines, guardrails, and parameters that we want to put in place so that we can encourage people to use it to become more productive, more effective, build capacity so that they can work on these more meatier strategic type of things. But how do we do that in a way that protects and safeguards the company as well? And so thinking through that, what are those guidelines? What are those parameters? A number of companies have taken steps to where they just build it in-house as opposed to going to like an external provider like ChatGPT or something.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, there's a real opportunity here for really focusing on the people element and the system element, and the CTO and the CHRO. This is the perfect opportunity, surely, for them to align in any boardroom, right? This has got to be the priority. And I'm interested on the linking of of AI and technology to upskilling, and I think that'll lead us into the next point. But one of the things I've kind of summarized in my head when I'm talking to people who have that fear of AI is going to take my job, and I sometimes have to remind them that innovation has been around for years, right? Look, we just talked about the combination of a two-way pager and a mobile phone. That was mind-boggling at the time it happened. Like, everyone was like blown by it. And so, it's on a different scale. I totally take that point. It is on a hugely different scale, but it's always going to be. The next one's going to be on a bigger scale because we just get bigger and better over time. I think if people get comfortable with innovation and change, and that this is inevitable, then actually that takes away a lot of that fear in individuals. And the final point I'll say on that, that I think is important based on our conversation, is also access and inclusion should fall into AI and technology. There are a huge amount of people who don't have the same access to technology around different areas of even the US, the UK, and other countries. And I think we have a responsibility to think about that as well, including people who may not have had access or gone on the same journey as others in using AI.
Absolutely. Right. Now, in addition to accessibility, I would also add, especially, as an HR person, an HR leader, there's a concern around bias, right? That's in the AI, that's in the technology. And so how can we use it, but then ensure that we're trying to remove as much bias as we can? And a great example of that is with recruitment, right? Talent acquisition. One of the powerful things that AI can do is you have hundreds of applicants for a particular job, and based off your job spec, it can narrow down and parse down based on the spec who's the most qualified and who should, screen and interview, etc. But in that, it raises the question, okay, so who didn't get selected and why did they not get selected and what bias is in that? So that's another thing that we need to try to figure out and make sure that while we're using it and it's doing what we want it to do, who's not being included? What's the impact there as well? And trying to come up with a balance and making sure that we're being inclusive, but that we're also identifying the right talent.
Yeah. Another thing to add to the to-do list for CHROs and CTOs. I think I think the other thing that that we kind of started to lead into there is selection and the profile of potential future talent. And one of the things that we're seeing from quite large enterprises, certainly in the financial services space and the technology space, is this focus on becoming a skills-based organization. So focusing on hiring for skill set as opposed to pedigree, education, or background. And I think it really links into that kind of, what are you screening for, when you do this automation or I use the AI tools to do that.
So one of the things I've been doing, focused on the skill base for actually a few years now. This isn't anything new. I do think there are certain industries that it lends itself to do that more than others. And I also think there's a differentiation between the type of role it is. Is it an early career, mid-career, or is it a more senior level? I think at the more senior levels, you're still going to have the traditional, you still got skills, but you're still going to have the traditional way of recruitment in terms of degree, certifications, experience. And while you might use the AI in the beginning to screen, regardless of what the role is, at some point, you do need that human interaction or that human to come in, because I don't feel that AI is going to assess for culture, a cultural cultural integration, because that's very important, right? Because you can hire somebody that can look great on paper, have all the skills or degree and qualifications that you want, but if they're not going to integrate and into your organization seamlessly, right, based on your culture, they're gonna wind up leaving because they don't feel included. They don't feel that connection. They don't feel it as an environment where they can thrive and grow. So I think that's something that needs to be assessed the more traditional way, a human or a recruiter, right, or a leader, really by conducting an interview and asking those types of questions to ensure that the person will be a cultural add. I'm convinced, maybe I can be proven wrong, but I'm not convinced that the AI can screen or can assess for that. I still think you need to have that interaction, that human interaction, that human, connection for that, for when you're assessing for culture, or as I mentioned before, if it's a senior level job, an executive level job, I think that's where the more traditional way of assessing it take place. However, for the early career, mid-career positions, I do think, you can continue to use AI to help you screen and assess whether or not this person is the right fit for the role and meets the qualifications.
So, because we've talked about talent, let's just quickly pivot to leadership in the people and HR function. Recently, we've seen an uptick in the creation of chief talent officers in addition to chief people officers or chief HR officers. And I know you and I have spoke before about also whether chief diversity officers and where they should sit as well. Can you share your thoughts or insights on is there a need for another C-suite, that one that does talent, one that does people, one that does diversity? What are your thoughts on that?
My personal view, which I'm sure many of your listeners may disagree, but my personal view is that you either have your CHRO or your CPO, whatever you want to call it, that you have your senior chief HR leader and all the other aspects of HR around talent management, compensation, talent acquisition, etc. Your COEs, your comp and ben, those all fit under and roll up under that. In my experience, I see that people want to make a distinction between what's HR operations, so things like comp and ben, more the HRIS, some of the COEs. They see that more as on the operation side, and that would roll up under HR or the CHRO, whereas they refer to the other half more, what I refer to as more client facing, right? So the parts of the job like HR business partners, the learning and development, DEI, change management, organizational development, those types of functions fall under either the chief talent officer or chief people officer. And so there are some organizations that want to separate the COEs or the the HR operations side from more of the client facing. So I can understand that and agree that you want to separate that, but in terms of where it sits and how it rolls up, I don't think you need to have a chief of HR and then also a separate chief of talent or a separate chief of something else. So I understand that you want to have leaders, but I don't think it's necessary to call them a chief, separately a chief of. I just think everything should just roll up to whoever that senior most HR person.
Yeah, and to be honest, I can get behind that as well because most would probably think I'd argue for a chief talent officer. I've worked in the staffing and recruitment industry for most of my career, so that might be a benefit to me. But actually, having sat on boards and sat in the board meetings, you need someone who can kind of balance all the priorities of the operating model of the talent kind of structure and also HR and people function all in one, and understand how to make sure all of that's working collectively. Because the challenge is if you create more silos, which we've been trying to get away from for many years, right, as orgs, right, you probably will create more challenges. So I can get behind it, absolutely, and I agree with you. I think the challenge is absolutely how you structure and how you manage all of the duties that are under that CHRO or that chief people officer. That's where you need to focus your efforts.
I think historically, because you mentioned the chief diversity officer role, and I have somewhat strong views about this, but in speaking with my colleagues and my friends, this is like an ongoing debate. So like when I hear, oh, I don't report into HR, head of diversity, I'm the chief diversity officer. I'm not in HR. I don't work for HR. I have nothing to do with HR. And it's said in a way that is so negative, and like it's a problem. It's a bad thing. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, chief diversity officer, you're all about inclusion, but yet you don't want to be included under the HR family or the HR umbrella. But I do understand where it comes from and why people in those positions that have worked for organizations that are structured like that, why they think that way, why they feel that way. And it's because of this. It has to do with the budget, the resourcing, and the commitment by senior leadership. In the past, several years ago, they started to pull out diversity and have a report directly to the CEO. And in those instances, they were given a separate budget, the resources and the support that they need. And it was also a way to show how important it is. It's so important that it reports directly to the CEO. It depends on your organization and it depends on the environment and the nature of your business. So I do understand why in certain situations it calls for that. But when you set that up, it also puts out there that this is separate, when actually it should be part of a broader human capital umbrella, and the head of HR and the head of diversity person are going to be working closely together because they have to. But in times when they're separated, in speaking with my colleagues, they said, when we sit in HR, we get our budgets cut. It doesn't become a priority. It's not part of the strategy of the company. It loses its importance and focus. And so I can appreciate and understand, both sides of that coin. Okay, personally, I don't like it because I just feel like it creates exclusion, and it actually puts up barriers and silos, and it creates a challenge on the rest of HR working collaboratively and making sure that they're aligned with the diversity function.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've found, having worked with orgs that have it both ways, is that you're highlighting it as a problem in some instances. which is fine. We know it's a problem, but like that is more of a mindset shift and a cultural shift, not a process and org shift. And that, I truly believe, I mean, I'm really fortunate to have worked in some really diversity focused organizations, so maybe I'm a little bit blinkered because I've just been experienced with truly focused, diverse and inclusive organizations. And I agree with you, we can't do that by separating and creating further silos. But I think, if we can find a way where we can reduce the C-suite, make sure they're really focused on collaboration and a holistic view of how everything operates to operate effectively, then all of these things will come much quicker in my view. But we'll park leadership structures and diversity for now. I'd like now to sort of step into thinking about our listeners, from all across the world, HR, talent leaders. What advice do you wish someone had given you in the early stages of your HR career, or even now you've done it? What would you tell yourself, in your early stages of your career?
I would say, don't be afraid to take risks, and I would say be flexible, be open. One of the things that I appreciate about myself is that I took a risk and did a career pivot earlier on in my career. And then throughout my career, I've been open to both generalist and specialist type of role in the space. So I would tell people coming into the HR profession to be flexible, don't be afraid to take a risk. And I would also say, try to marry your 3 P's: your purpose, your profession, and your passion. Be really clear about who you are, what you want, and what you need to thrive in terms of the type of environment that you need to thrive and do well. I think if you keep that first and you focus on that, you will have a very robust career and you will end up where you're supposed to be.
Nice. I love the 3 Ps. I mean, I think purpose is one of the things that's driven me for a long time in my career. I pivoted into staffing from banking. I spent some time in banking in my early career. And I remember watching certain individuals getting promotions and getting chosen because of their pedigree, their education, their background, what schools they went to. And this is, 17 years ago, right? So, I just remember sort of my purpose became, I'm going to help people who don't look like that get jobs. I'm going to help people like me get those jobs. And I recruited for the number 1 law firm in the world. I recruited for the top investment banks in the early days of my career. And I just used to fight getting the candidates through. I'd be like, look, this is the best person. They're so much better than those 5 people that tick the boxes that do that. That's quite a hard path to have trodden. And you have that purpose will drive you through. It will be hard. It will be hard. So everyone has their own challenges and different environments. But purpose, I think, is the key one there. I really, really like hearing that because it really resonates with me. I think, that will push you through in the tough times if you keep that purpose clear.
Absolutely.
So, final 2 questions. We've talked about this before. LevelUp's mission is to develop solutions that elevate the world of work. What does elevating the world of work mean to you?
Elevating the world of work, to me, a couple things come to mind. First and foremost, when I hear that, I think of meeting people where they are at. And in order to do that, you need to understand what their needs are, as well as understand the strategy and the direction of where the business is trying to. I think once you understand that and you're clear around what the needs are, where the business is going, then you can put a plan in place to elevate the future of work or the workplace, right? And so for me, it's really around being intentional and around how you think through that, and really trying to meet employees' expectations, which we talked about before, which is ever changing and ever evolving, to try to meet their needs. So when I think about elevating the world of work, it's really understanding and meeting employees where they're at, understanding where the future of your business is trying to go, and then putting a plan in place that's going to meet that.
And the final question from me and focused on our listeners. Some of them will be 2 years into a HR people career. Some might be 5 years, 10 years. They might be talent in the talent space as well. What would you say to them on how they can play a part in elevating the world of work? Because as you said earlier, we spend so much time at work. We've got to elevate the world of work because it's the place we're at most of the time. It's got to be just as good as going home, right? in my future state.
I would scale it down to two things. One is be curious. Be a curious learner. Prepare yourself. Take the time to learn about your business, and gather that information. Skills. We talk about skills. What we're looking for skills. Where is the business going? What are the skills that are going to be required for that? So I would tell a young person that's starting out in their career, take your time, educate yourself, and really try to understand the future of the business and the future of where things are going. And use data. Use data where you can to support that as well. And then the second thing I would say is, when you are building relationships and interacting and meeting with leaders and peers and colleagues, try to figure out what their problem is, or try to figure out what their need is, what keeps them up at night. And then try to figure out, how can you help them? How can you serve, right? And then it always comes back threefold to help you, right? So I would say, try to understand a business challenge or something that the leadership is trying to figure out or work through. And then you can come and if you're prepared, you can say, okay, so I've given this some thought. Here's what I'm thinking. Can I help you with this? Here's how I can best help you solve that particular problem or issue. And so in doing that, in preparing yourself, educating yourself, and then also trying to understand what the business needs are, what the business challenges are, so that you can come up with creative or innovative solutions and ideas to address that. In doing that, you will elevate.
Such a great way to finish. I think, we're all just here to help each other, really. We've just got to make sure we're focusing on the right things, right? So I really love that. Monique, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so grateful for you giving us your time. I know how busy family commitments and work and all the stuff you've got going on. Thank you for being a guest on Level Up With Us, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Well, Grant, I can tell you, thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. Stay connected by subscribing to the Level Up With Us podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or find us on our website, leveluphcs.com. Tune in for the next episode of Level Up With Us. Until next time.